Hello and welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here today as we talk about the wonderful hobby that is Civil War reenacting. And hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on the history and the unit that my fellows and I portray, which is the 2nd North Carolina Mounted Infantry. Now wait, I hear you say. You said North Carolina. You're wearing blue. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, folks, but the Civil War was not as cut and dry as people think it was and is cut down the middle. In fact, there were 5 Union units that came from North Carolina, those being the 1st and 2nd infantry units that were formed on the eastern portion of the state, the 2nd and 3rd North Carolina Mounted Infantries, which came from the mountains, as well as a unit known as the Africa Brigade, which was a unit entirely made up of former slaves. In October of 1863, men who had deserted from the Confederate Army after the defeats at Vicksburg and Gettysburg, as well as men from the foothills, mountains, and hollers of western North Carolina, made their way across the Blue Ridge into Tennessee, headed for Knoxville to join up with the Union, which is where the 2nd North Carolina was formed and was home based out of. Unionism was strong in the mountains of western North Carolina because the residents resented the eastern plantation class, for they enjoyed wealth and prosperity while they and their families lived in relative poverty. No more were this evident Henderson, Transylvania, Yancey, Mitchell, Madison, and Wilkes counties, as well as many other North Carolina counties that we have seen from the roster rolls from the war. In fact, Union sentiments were so strong in Wilkes County that the Confederates often referred to it as the old United States. Later on that same year, a unit of pro-Unionists were raised in Henderson County, which then formed the 2nd North Carolina Mounted Infantry's Company F. Now, Mounted Infantry, that's a term not many people know, but simply put, it is just another term for cavalry, which is denoted by the yellow on my chevrons. However, the 2nd North Carolina as a unit today mainly portrays a dismounted style of combat. This was a much more common practice during the war than people seem to realize, because when you really think about it, a horse is a very expensive piece of equipment to train and raise, and therefore their lives are much more valuable than the men that they're being ridden by. So what was much more common to actually see on the battlefield was a unit of dismounted cavalry marching across and joining up as skirmishers for larger units. Now, I am not saying by any means that cavalry charges and riding in on horseback gallantly never happened. Far from it. They were effective, and they used them when necessary. But it was much more common to see a unit marching out dismounted. Now, how would they go about this? Well, you see, 4 men would ride out in a unit on their horses, and 3 would then dismount, leaving the 4th to hang back and guard the horses away from all of the fighting. The 3 men would then march out and join up with other men from their unit. Now, for some of the common questions that I get asked, why do Civil War reenacting? Well, simply put, it's because I have a deep love of history throughout all history. But being able to go out and do reenacting and living history events is a wonderful medium to actually fulfill my love of history. For many people, it's just to go out and have fun and blow off steam during the weekend. But for a vast majority of us, like myself, it is to understand, learn, and preserve history. Now, another question. Why the 2nd North Carolina? Well, again, simply put, as a native of western North Carolina, it's a part of my history. and I love learning about the history of where I grew up and the men and women who came before all of us. It's utterly fascinating to me. And lastly, people tend to often ask, how did I get into reenacting? Well, my friends, it's sad to say, but that's a story for another time and another video. As for the modern unit, we currently hold our base of operations in Tyrell County, led by Captain David Smith, commander of Company A of the 2nd North Carolina Mounted Infantry. We, as a unit, represent the original regiment that was formed and saw action in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, and southern Kentucky. And while the unit is not connected to any major battles that most people often associate with the Civil War, we do know, however, that we are connected to many smaller skirmishes and that did occur and were just as deadly, albeit on a much smaller scale. Men, women, and children all lost their lives because of these conflicts on both sides. And the way of life in the mountains of North Carolina were forever changed due to the events that happened within the war. And it is because of this that our unit strives to educate the public through living history, reenactments of battles and skirmishes, school events, and organizational appearances, and even special events. If you like what I have done here today and bringing to light a small part of our nation's history and North Carolina's history as well, then please like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And as always, I am your most obedient servant, Corporal Killian.